If we look at the graphs, it's always best to look at the figures, but the graphs can give us a quick indication. Left top, you can see that's normal. The B face that's at top, you can see it is a longer part. The D face at the bottom, which is straight, you can see it is sufficient length. If you look then top right, you can see both the B face and the D face, especially the D face, is extremely short. So there will not be good compression, and the B face, the milking, will take much longer because it's not open for long enough. If we look then bottom left, with a short D face, it will milk very fast, but we will have a lot of congestion following by teat damage. And then right and bottom, it's a 2x2 system, and you can see the one side there is no pulsation. This can happen either if one side of the pulsator is damaged, or it can happen when the teat liner is full. Then there's no difference between the pulsator, vacuum, and atmospheric air. So now we've looked at a lot of additional things of the milking machine. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, we as vets work for the farmer. We can try and tell him what to do, what we know is important, but we also need to consider what is important for him. So why I've got these two choices is the way we're going to select and set the milking machine will depend very much on this. Now, I said to you when we started off, the speed is becoming important in South Africa due to the large herds. And on the other hand, wherever you go faster, you lose in teat condition and increase cell count. So basically the answer would be to get a balance between the two. As I said, basically whenever you milk faster, you are going to also milk less complete. So not only will you damage the teat, but more milk will be left, and the liner will maybe slip less, but then uncomfortable for the cow and damaging the cow. Now, what the map that I show you here is called a liner map. And the manufacturers should actually have for each specific liner that they have a liner map where they have tested the liner. Now, if we look at the top, we can see it's a combination between speed and compression for a specific liner. This liner was a triangular liner, and its overpressure is 5 kPa. If you look then at the left-hand side, that just gives the indication of the vacuum. The vacuum increases there from 34 kPa to 47. And you can see at the bottom, if you've got short teats, in other words, they're shorter than 3 centimeters, they will always be compromised. We cannot prevent them from swelling. So if we look then at the bigger part of this table, where you see B face on top, it is the change in the B face, basically from 30% to 600 to 60% of the time. So if you look at the color scheme, the greenish color there is where it will be fine for the teat. We most likely will not damage the teat at that level. The orange we start damaging, it's a medium risk, and then the rest of them become a very high risk. So the way we read that is the percentage you see here is how fast it can go. So obviously if you look at the 100% at the bottom right in the middle, we have to have a vacuum of 47 kPa and a setting of 45 to 50% in the B face. But we do not want that. So let's look at our best option in the bluish green area. We see here 89%, but if we look at the vacuum here, this is extremely high. So if we've got problems with a very, very short period of no flow, we will cause a lot of damage. So we rather move up to the next best, which is 88%. You can see that's at 42 kPa. There, the B phase setting goes to be 40, or we can go up to 85, where we've got a little bit less vacuum, 85%, which might be a good setting for this farmer. To still have him milking relatively fast without damaging the teeth. So having this for a particular liner can be very helpful for you to help him select the correct settings on the machine. Right, so let's look at something in practice. A farmer calls you. Basically what he says, I have a huge problem. For many months ago now, the bulk count score is over 400,000 cells per milliliter. Remember, it's not only penalties, but also the percentage of milk that the farmer is losing. And he said to you, I don't understand it, the hygiene is good, I have an excellent milking team, but nothing seemed to work. All right, that's a typical call you get. It doesn't really give you an indication where to start. So if we go to the farm, this is maybe a few indicators that can help you start to get going. First thing, we can ask the farmer, and hopefully he's got good records based on good findings, the number of clinical mastitis cases per month. Is it less than 1%, which is great? 2% we can live with, but the moment it becomes more than 2%, it is something we definitely need to follow up. Bulk milk somatic cell count, he's told us now it's about 300,000. We would like it to be under 150. So on a monthly basis, and it's good to look for a few months, as the farmer said there, because many things can have its spike just for individual case. And then we also, for a longer term, to find what's going on, is look at the number of cows. And that, you can see, is calculated by the average number of lactating and dry cows in the herd. And cull for mastitis, we want less than 3%. Now, if we look at the lactating cows, the questions we can ask is, if we look at the percentage of cows in first lactation with cell count below 200,000, our goal is really to have 90% plus. As they come down, it alerts us. If you look at individual cell count on percentage new infections, again here it's very handy to have then our microbiology. If it's less than 8%, we can accept it, but if it goes higher than that, it will start giving us an indication, is this increased cell count due to infection or not? So here already we can get some indication. The third thing we can look at is the cure rate. The cure rate, and you know that we do not get good cure rates with adults. So if it is above 40, that is what we can hope for. That is excluding now agalactiae. It's acceptable between 30 and 35, but if it becomes lower, there's two things obviously we need to look at. First of all is doing a check whether or not we find antimicrobial resistance. But almost more important in the dairy cows is to look at the damage, the probable damage, chronic damage in the udder. Because as I mentioned to you in class, it's no good going on treating these animals with chronic infection. All you're doing is wasting money, and you are not going to get that cow healthy. In the dry period, goals we can look for, and this is now coming from the dry period, the percentage of new infections. The goal is that there should be less than 10%. If this goes above 10%, we need to go and look very carefully at what happens in the dry period, in other words, the environment. And second of all, the calving time. Remember, the cow is at great risk during the calving. Disinfectant, how does that look like? The second thing, obviously, also looking at the percentage of curate during drying off. Remember, here we can expect much higher than during the lactation. So if it's less than that, the same things that we talked about during lactation. Isn't it chronic cases? Or isn't there maybe a problem with the antibiotic we use? All right, teat in scores, if we look again at the example. If we look at first lactation cows, and when I do it in a herd, I prefer to have the scores of the first lactation cows separate from the adult ones. But in this herd, can you see that 50 of 2, where we should have at least 80% with scores of 1 and 2. So we know that at the moment there is something irritating and damaging the teat canals. The adult cows in this herd we can see is not good, but we're not sure whether, because the 3 and the 4 doesn't get healthy again, whether this happened in a previous lactation or in this lactation. That is why your first lactation scores are very helpful to evaluate what's going on. The guys that's been on call has done this. If we audit the milking process and you evaluate touch to attachment, if it's too slow, we know that the milk flow is not, or the lay down reflex hasn't happened, so it is going to over milk at that period of time. If you look at the second minute milk flow of 2,9, that's a little bit low. So before we make any changes, remember we have to go and look at the settings. We have to go and look at the liners, the age, but also the selection of the liners, and that can give us an indication of where a problem might be. If we've got so much residual milk, it can be a problem with, first of all, remember if you've got a very high vacuum, the cow will hurt and adrenaline will be secreted and a lot of milk will remain in the udder because of that. On the other hand, it might be units also being taken off at incorrect. Liner slip, it should be less than 5%. If we sit mostly towards the end of milking, we know that it might be a problem with the udder conformation, or we might have a lot of animals that's got a light coating. Otherwise, like I showed you on the photo before, that the one is milked out before the others. All right, second minute milk, second minute teat in vacuum. That is what we want to have in a herd. For the average producer, 36 to 38 kPa, and for the high producer, it will be lower than 32, 33 kPa. That is ideal. So if we again look at the case from that we saw on a farm, if the high producer has got a vacuum of 28.2, this might be too low. You can see the vacuum fluctuation increase here, and this might be because of a bit of liner slip. We can see then that the mid producers also low, but even in that case, we can see that the fluctuation is more than we want. So too low vacuum is also not good, but our major problem comes with too high vacuum. If we look then at a case from industry, if first of all look at the table, the printout I've provided to you with, it is a printout of the whole herd, the lactating animals. If you look at, let's start from the left-hand side going right. Left-hand side, the D means a dead quarter, M stands for mastitis, N stands for normal. In is there was a problem with the sample, And NSD is what we after. There is where the cell count is high without any microbiology. And very, very often this is due to milking machine problems. So first of all, it gives it to you per quarter. You can see right front, right hind, left front, left hind. But let's look at the total. If we follow the NSD, you can see it's 31.8%, 31.9% basically. And we do not want to have this higher than 5%. Mastitis in this case, if you look at the bottom, you can see it's 20%, which is very, very high because this is sampling at one point in time. We do not want it more than 2% over a month, and here we've got it that high. So high cell count is in this case 31% caused by irritation and 20% caused by microbiology. So obviously the first line we're going to follow up will then be the irritation. You can see then there is always in that herd, but this 7.5% cannot be the only contribution to the major problem. So if we take the same herd and we look at the number of quarters that's got high cell count, you can see the NSD, the cow number, and then the number of quarters. In the summary, we see one cow with all 4 quarters, 3 cows with, or 4 cows, sorry, with 3 quarters, and they can be due to a systemic problem or a cow just late in lactation or with colostrum. But you can see the majority, 24 of them, basically has got in 1 or 2 quarters, indicating that this problem might be a machine problem. We can look at the different quarters, but yes, not really a pattern, a little pattern maybe that we can see the hind quarter, especially left hind, is a little bit higher. But if you've got a problem where the machine takes off, you sometimes see here that the front or hind quarters are shown larger indication of damage. We can also then calculate the milk loss. This is then based on the NSD cases or the irritation cases. This example I use here was a very short herd, small herd. The small herd, you could see, only produced 1,300 liters per day, and it was still an old milk price, not even R3. But even with that small amount of milk and low milk price, the daily loss due to this NSD, and this is milk also not produced, amounted to 700 Rand. In a month, that was 23,000, and over a year, you can see that's quite a lot of money, 280,000. So if you can show this, this is good to know, but this is also a motivation for the farmer. So very often, once you can show the figures, it's like a wake-up call. All right, so to round that off, our take-off message is, again, the milking machine can play such a major role in the udder health because it basically almost controls what happens to the teat canal. The key factor for us to measure is the second minute, and now also using the Vardia to look at the vacuum of both the mouthpiece and the short milk tube. I believe that we as veterinarians, although we do not touch the machine, change this machine, if we understand it better, we can play a major role in contributing and checking that the settings, the operation, the maintenance is correct, and in such a way play a major role proactively in preventing the udder health.
Dr. Inge-Marie, we've got a question from Hendrika Smith asking, do you have any comment on silicone versus rubber liners?
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Hendrika. Good question. I left that out. Yes, the difference between the silicone and the rubber liner, first of all, if we just look at the ability for us to be able to clean it properly and its life, your silicone rubber is by far the better because it's got a lifetime of milkings of up to 10,000 milkings. The fat and things doesn't go into the silicone rubbers or into the silicone as it does into the rubbers. So it is really the better of the two. The one problem with silicone, and that is why it's not that popular, is first of all, it's very expensive. But the second problem with the silicone is if it falls and the cow steps on it, very often it is torn. So it is basically the maintenance cost that is very high. What farmers often do is not using the silicone liner, but a lot of the pipes that are silicone. And the other thing to keep in mind is silicone rubbers is usually, or the silicone liners is usually much lighter than our rubber liners. And you need a special shell for them where they add in weight. Because if the shell and the whole milking unit is not weighing enough, it would creep up and cause the same effect as a hard lip does, and the blood circulation will then not work well.
Doctor, thank you. We've got another comment and question from Prof. Dirk Lawrence saying, good morning, Inge. Good to hear you again. It feels like yesterday when we worked together. When we consider the role of companies such as Delaval, Waikato with regard to the design and building of milking parlors, routine maintenance of milking machines, and their very sophisticated data systems, Delpro and Affimilk, to monitor milk production and quality, which is essential during problem solving. How do you see the cooperation and work relationship with these companies to the mutual benefit of all?
Hi Dirk, so nice hearing about you. When are you coming to visit? Anyway, no, I believe this is absolutely essential these days. The information we get from the Delaval and the Waikato, the Affimilk, is, I believe, essential for the veterinarian to use. And at the moment, that is still very, very unutilized. We are busy writing a user manual, and I hope Delaval will help us with one for their program that will make it much more user-friendly for the veterinarian, because these programs not only tells us about the milking machine, it tells us so much more about the whole milking process, the nutrition, even these days, rumination of the animals, how long they lie down. I believe without them in the sophisticated herds, we are really not doing a good job if we don't utilize them. And I believe the vet should take a leading role here as well.
So you can continue with the environment and other health.
Thank you, Elena.
Okay.
All right, if we look at that, obviously I cannot talk about all the factors in the environment. So what I've done is just try and select a few factors that plays a role. Also for you guys, I know a lot of you young guys is looking to go overseas, to keep things into consideration that all the countries are not the same. And if you are evaluating other health in different countries, you need to look in a different way at the environment. So first of all, again, and I know I've done it when we started off with the milking machine, but the farmer's point of view is very important. When we are veterinarians working with the farmer, remember, we are working for the farmer, and we need to, what is important for him must be important for us, obviously. And for the farmer, number one, he has to run his business. Money is very important. You think about the milking machine outlay, what Prof. Dirk has spoken about, it costs millions of rand these days. It's sophisticated, but all of that comes with money. If we look at nutrition, that is the largest running cost on a dairy farm. Huge layout for the farmer. And then where does he market his milk? The second, if we look at the secondary industry, are they getting the best price for the farmers? Should the farmers market directly, which is a huge burden and responsibility? So these are things that's important for the farmer. So if we as veterinarians look at it, the most important, we know it's the most important disease of the dairy cattle. But we need to keep into consideration the fact that it's not easy to solve the problem. There's a lot of factors. We've spoken now earlier on about the milking machine. Now we're going to look a little bit at the environment, but there are so many factors that plays a role here. So it's a nice challenge. What is happening worldwide, what we're seeing is clinical cases is decreasing. Now we can say, yes, that's great. That is what we want. But the problem is with the clinical cases decreasing, the farmers could identify them on the farm. We actually need now better ways in identifying subclinical mastitis because they are increasing. As you can see, a small percentage of cows are responsible for most of the clinical cases, and this is why it's so important to identify our chronic animals and try and get rid of this either by culling, inactivation, short time period, or maybe in some cases, but most of the time not, by treatment. And 6% of the cows, basically a similar thing, is responsible for throwing away most of the milk. So just the concept from an epidemiological point of view, if we want a healthy herd, we can try and the duration of intramammary infections, if they occur, I would say first of all, try and prevent them even from occurring, but lowering the duration with treatment or culling if we can't do it the other way. Very important, and I know, guys, we've been over this over and over, but this is the foundation on which udder health is built. Your milking procedure, very important biosecurity. And then now we look at the bottom, the risk that is posed by the housing, the hygiene, and how susceptible the animal is. Now, don't get a fright if you look at this table. It is just one of many tables we can use as veterinarians to try and establish where the problem is. If we start at the top, if we find in a herd less than 2% of cows are responsible for the cell count. Let's go then, if that is yes, let's go to the left-hand side. If it's a few cows, we can then take samples from them to determine whether it's a chronic or just a spike, a thing that occurred. We can separate them, palpate the udders, decide to treat, to dry off maybe early, to cull, or what to do with the milk. But then we focus on those animals. If that is not the case, we go to the no and we move down then. If we look at the lactation period, if the new infections, remember earlier on we said we don't want them above 8%. However, if they are, we need to see, first of all, look at your first and second lactation animals. We need to revisit the milking procedure, equipment. Did we purchase animals lately? Remember, we think about agalacto there again. If it is contagious, obviously we need to segregate the animals if at all possible. On the other hand, if it's more environmental problem, the hygiene and biosecurity and susceptibility of these animals is important. If the chronic infections is high, obviously we have to start concentrating on identifying them, treating, culling, getting them out of the herd. The first step would be we need to look at the dry period. If we look at the fresh infections, if it's more than 15% of the animals very early after they calve down, we need to go and look at the housing or the area in which the animals were kept. We also need to look at the drying off protocol. I see that's quite a lot coming up on that, and I'm glad because it's very, very important. And then we can also look at the new infections to give us an indication of where this originates. So just this is one of the keys just to help you to start to identify where a problem is. Now this was a very nice photo. One of the things we need to look at is seasonal differences. If we look, for instance, in Europe, and this is a photo taken in a dairy in Switzerland, in the winter months, many of those animals are kept indoors. And I show you especially this photo because in Switzerland, they've got very small herds, maybe 13 to 16 animals. And that is the way manually, basically, you have to clean day after day here, where in larger herds, you've got more automated cleaners. In Switzerland and some of the most of the European countries, during the summer months, there's a time where the animals go up in the mountain, and it's a totally different challenge from the environment to the udder health in that situation. Maybe just interest sake, one of the main reasons for losing dairy cows 2 years ago in Switzerland was breaking of legs, because they're starting to crossbreed with dairy breeds that hasn't got such a strong legs as the previous animals they used in Switzerland. If you look at team R herds, this is a photo from a team R herd in Israel. They remain on this, and this is actually manure bedding, which every morning they've got a ripper in there and rips everything up, make it nice and soft. Make sure it's not wet, but the animals remain on this bedding year in, year out. You can see these fans trying to cool the animals down in the summer because it's very hot there. And I can tell you, if you put a question mark about the plate count and the suspect if we're using manure, this dairy herd is the highest producing dairy herd in Israel. And the cell count, average cell count is below 100,000, and the total plate count throughout the year basically below 1,000 colony forming units. So it's not really the bedding, it's the way you manage it. Then on the other side, we have pastures, and that we've got in South Africa quite a lot. The challenge from a pasture, remember it doesn't always look like that. If we had a lot of rain, there's mud in these pastures. The areas where the animals walk to and fro, the parlour might be very muddy. So also irrigating the pastures can be some of the challenges to udder health. Now, I thought of putting this in because this always remains interesting. This is one of the smaller herds in Saudi Arabia. You can see that's in the desert. This is what they need for you guys that's interested. The water consumption for this farm in 2009, you can see how much cubic meters they use. And for us, only the guys there can do it because the diesel consumption was 1 billion liters that year just to irrigate that pasture. Again here, just to show you the way, like the previous picture I showed you where they've got the pulsators actually underneath to keep them clean and dust-free. And in this large herd, you could see that is them that spelled incorrect, but the mastitis was less than 0.5%. I'm not sure of their criteria, but if we look at the somatic cell count, it is not bad for such a large herd and the plate count to be so low. Well, yeah, we won't say much about that environment. All right, so your environment can play a role as far as injury is concerned. Very often, if we have animals in an overcrowded place or a barn that is not well designed, where the animals can't lie down properly, you can get injuries where the one cow can step on the other. Other where it's not physical injuries, but things that can play a role is what I've seen in practice. I was at one dairy carousel that was built for Jersey cows, and the next owner actually had Holsteins. So they were too big for this parlor. Now, as it moved around, the back of the udder of the cows was rubbing against the solid pole that keeps them on the stand basically all the time. So we did a trial where we did quarter milk samples and identified all cows where this rubbing occurred during the whole milking process. And the hindquarter somatic cell count in these animals were in 80% of cases much higher than those that didn't rub. So hard bedding on which the animals may lie down, if they have to climb over something and hit the udder against it, all of these things will increase the somatic cell count. So look very well at where the animal is lying down, where the animal is walking. Make sure that there are not things that can injure, barbed wire that can injure her.